I'm hoping Michael's ready. Is Michael ready? Okay, Michael's ready. All right. There's Michael. Good morning, Michael. Did you mute your microphone? There yeah. He is.
I said I'm ready. Sorry I missed you last week.
Oh, okay. Well, we're sorry we missed you too. Okay, and we're feeding back someplace. Hold on. All right, fixed. So what happened last week?
I don't know. My camera wasn't working. I couldn't. I tried to figure a bunch of stuff out. Then I tried to get on just with audio only, and then I was having issues there. So I don't know. It's just crazy day. You hear all these people all the time talk about issues. When they go to stream or whatever, and I'm just like, how can it be like all the time? But honestly, there's issues all the time. It's so crazy.
How many times have we ever gotten on and there hasn't been an issue?
Yeah, not many times actually.
No, there's usually some kind of issue somewhere. So that is the problem with streaming, but we have a nice audience populating this morning. So that's good. I think everybody's interested in hearing what our author has to say today.
Definitely.
So, and I see that she's waiting. And so we're going to bring her on here in a second. But before we get started, do you have anything to say about the stock market?
And I was trying to get a bunch of things pulled up. I didn't know how soon Joy was going to be able to get on with us or not, so I didn't wind up doing it. But just a couple things I want to say. Okay, so we had this major meltdown, in the stock market, supposed meltdown here these last 3 or 4 days. Well, if you look at it, if you just rewind 6, 7, 8, 9 months, the stock market literally went up 27% in 9 months. I mean, how would you like to make that all the time? And then it only drops 5%. It drops back down to 20%.
Hair on fire.
Yeah. And everybody is going crazy saying, it just shows you how ridiculous this is. But if you look, it's, and I talk about it all the time, how the value of our dollar, which is really our purchasing power is disappearing.
Right.
And I would bring up the US debt clock and talk about some things like that, but we can just get into Joy here pretty quickly. But on the next show, I'm going to, for about 5 minutes, I want to bring all those numbers up and have some charts and some things so I can really show exactly why that inflation is going like this, even though, they're acting like everything's okay. But our economy is not in good shape. And let me just ask you this, Jenny, okay? So you're not an economist, you're not a banker, you're not one of these money people.
Nor do I want to be.
Yeah. Okay. If you create a problem by increasing the money supply, okay? If you create, because that's why we have inflation. They've massively increased the money supply.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you fix that problem being a non-economist, non-banker? If you made it by increasing, how would you fix that?
Pull it out.
Exactly. Decrease. But what the bank does, what the Federal Reserve does, they never want to decrease the amount of debt, the amount of money that's out there, because that creates more debt, and debt is their power. Yeah. So what they do is they destroy jobs in order to try to manipulate supply and demand. And that's what we're getting now. I mean, I told you the other day, I have 3 friends that have literally lost their job. 2 of them are on food stamps, awful. Literally.
Yeah.
And these were terrible. White collar, good, Oklahoma, 1 in oil and gas, couple in tech. And it's just unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Well, something else that's unbelievable to piggyback on that is Joy Pullmann's book.
Yeah.
She sent me a PDF so I could read it last night. And since I didn't sleep at all,
You don't need
didn't
sleep.
sleep at all. And so that's what happens now, I guess. And now that I don't have children to wear me out at night, I just don't sleep. So I pretty much read all of Joy's book last night. So Joy, I'm going to bring you on here. I'm going to tell you so I don't just throw you in there. Good morning, Joy Pullmann. How are you this morning?
I'm great. Great to see you.
It is good to see you. Honestly, it's so good to see you. I feel like we never talk. And mainly it's because I never get anything written anymore. But honest to goodness, you have to do one thing just quickly before we talk about this book. You have to do this for me. I honestly do not understand how you do everything that you do. It's inconceivable to me. I mean, you have a major job. You are an executive editor for the Federalist. That's not a small job. You have 6 children, and I thought it was 5, so I missed one.
Don't worry, I can't count them either.
I don't know how
you, 3, it's like whatever.
Yeah, I don't know how do you do this? How is this happening for you?
I mean, I think the short answer is the grace of God, right? That's the only thing. But I mean, I think I've talked about this with you, Jenni, right? You know, you have a big garden. You've done very big things in your life. I mean, it just is a matter of where you choose to spend your time. So I don't choose to spend my time. I don't watch movies. I don't watch TV. That right there is already, I mean, the average, I know teenagers and middle schoolers, they spend the equivalent of a full-time job just staring at their screens outside of school every week, right? So that, you know, that's a huge source of extra time. And I also, you know, I've always worked before the kids get up, and I've worked during nap time. So I really, when I'm on the job, I don't play around. You know, I have my list of things that I need to get done, and I move through them as quickly, as efficiently as I can. You know, I don't sit around shopping online or, you know, whatever other things people, I don't, you know, have a lot of water cooler conversation. So that way I can be also more efficient when I'm on task.
So the oldest one is now what, 11?
He'll be 14 next month.
Oh my,
yeah,
holy
he's going to high school. Yeah.
It can't be that long ago. That's crazy.
14. Isn't it crazy? It feels both like an entire life ago and like yesterday at the same time.
I know. That's just nuts. And how old is the little one?
He's 4.
Wow. 14 to 4. Mm-hmm. That's a span, girlfriend.
I know.
Holy cow. I just don't. And
now you got something for another. So I told them you pray to Jesus.
Wow. But you know what? That's a good thing. I mean, we just need to populate the Pullmans.
Yeah.
And I will say, let me just say this really fast. So I read, I think pretty much almost all of that book last night. Or was it this morning? I think it was after 1 o'clock. Anyway, that the introduction to that book was written so well that I started reading it before I went to bed, and I had to go, hey, Dave, you got to listen to this. I must have read him like 3/4 of the introduction because the introduction is that's probably some of the best written commentary I think I've ever read. I mean, and I think you've done some fabulous stuff, but that was honestly awesome.
Thanks.
And if people can't understand after they read your book what the problem is, because I will say that was the other thing I found so fascinating about your book. Well, number one was, I don't know, again, how you maintained a job, 6 children, and then you had, I mean, what, a minimum of 25 citations in each chapter?
Oh, I actually think many more than that, but I actually
I'm just saying minimum.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, I don't actually know, but it's a lot. But I mean, you know that, Jenni, since the Common Core days, I've been very citation heavy because people will question. They don't believe stuff, so I like to say, go ahead, check it out. Look to the original source material. It's all here.
But that's true, because they do look at you and you don't know what you think. Now,
Right.
but I have to ask this question. What gave rise to this book? I mean, why hit this topic? I know you've always been very, heavily oriented on family and what family means to society, but I was kind of surprised about this book. Why?
Well, the short answer, honestly, is that the publisher read an essay of mine at the Federalist during last year's Pride Month, liked it, said, can you turn this into a book? I did a writing test. My husband said, I want to see, like you said, how can you pull this off? So I said, okay. I spent 3 months just kind of seeing how much I could write on the subject because, and at that point I'd written a third of the book. So I said, babe, I think I can do this. So, okay. So proceeded to do that. Another thing that really catches me is, and I have really noticed this in the rollout of the book. And by the way, for the audience, it's called False Flag, Joy Pullmann. You can just search my name and you can go to my bio at thefederalist.com. There's a link to it there to get it easily. But the other thing was that people really, people do not want to talk about this subject. And I knew that I was in a position in which I, was able to do that without fear of being fired. I have good friends who share a lot of my core beliefs about that. So I wouldn't be unpersoned by the majority of people I knew. So I just felt I was in a much more secure position to be able to say truths about these things that really most people, I think, want to avoid.
So this is your book.
Yeah.
Here. I'm going to make it a little bit longer, bigger so people can see it a little better. But that's your book right there, and it's on
the
Amazon.
Cover. The graphic designer did a great job with that. That's the White House portico, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, with the pride flag. And so this leads me to my next question, actually. I have to say, I was surprised with the history of the flag. And I kind of loved the way because you pretty much began the book with that. I mean, hey, just so that you know, here is what the history of this flag is. Do you mind running that down just a little bit for people who don't know? Because I thought it was fascinating, really.
Yeah. And part of the reason that I did that was I really wanted to prove to people that I'm not making all of this up. In the words of the people who support queer activism, they're explicit about what they want to do, and regime change is the end goal. So this was one of the examples proving that. I know that's a very strong and shocking thesis, so I really wanted to do a good job demonstrating that. And one of them is, so the original pride flag. And the reason I say that is I'm sure everyone's aware, you can see in that White House photo there on the screen, the original rainbow flag now has that triangle on it, and some people add the circles, so there's newer variations on that. But the original one was created, I believe, in the late 1960s, early 1970s by a Army or Navy Navy veteran, but a military veteran named Gilbert Baker. He was a homosexual man living in San Francisco at the time. And, his friends wanted him to demonstrate basically after the murder of Harvey Milk, the supervisor at the time. They wanted to show, the homosexual community, we're not going to be deterred by this. We will still be strong. So he came up with the idea of the rainbow flag. And, so he put it together, it came out, and it quickly basically spread throughout the San Francisco neighborhoods as a demonstration of support for homosexual activism. And from there, it went, national, as everyone is aware. But I think there's a couple important things to know about this guy, Gilbert Baker. For example, he said that his works of art were revolutionary. They were intended. He really used a lot of violent imagery, associated with his homosexual art. For example, he designed a very, very large pride flag that was in, I believe, New York City, taken basically against the law, against the permitted, parade course in order to be in front of a Catholic church, in order to express anti-Christian hatred. So, and he also was a member of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. It's still a drag group that goes around wearing nun habits and doing obscene and blasphemous things. There was a huge controversy about them with the Dodgers earlier this year wanting to honor them. But I mean, I actually can't. I do try to keep, even though I'm talking about an R-rated topic, I do try to keep it PG because I know I'm a mom. They might have kids in the background.
Right.
But suffice it to say, Gilbert Blythe has done purposefully art that is anti-Christian bigoted, right? He will perform Christian rites. He appeared as Jesus Christ as a transvestite, for example. The Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence specialize in doing anti-Christian mockery. They use every single Christian symbol, and they try to queer it. They add, acts that God calls sin to Christian rituals and rites and imagery. So basically the whole reason for their existence is to spew hatred at Christians. So this is the guy who created that pride flag. And so I also go into the history of, how the pride flag has changed over the years, because it's been intrinsically tied in with the race Marxism, the rest of the cultural Marxism pantheon. They've always considered themselves part of each other, back to kind of the inception of the critical race theory in the 1960s. And so that the Progress Pride flag, the one on the cover of my book on the White House, the one with the triangle on it, is intended to basically create, a rallying point for the intersectional mobs you will notice that it includes every single sexual behavior and every skin color except white heterosexuals, right? So they're inclusive of everything but one certain group of people that they want to demonize and define as the enemy. So these people are very clear about what they're going for while they preach love, acceptance. They really do express a lot of hatred and a lot of exclusion and enmity towards one specific group of people. And so it's very clear from just their imagery that they're not about love, rainbows, and all happy, unicorns and those sorts of things. That's all a bunch of propaganda covering the hatred at the core of this movement.
You're very specific about that in the book, and you explain, this is the thing that I really liked. You explain every single instance in which this hatred is spewed forth, the very defining things that explain hatred. There's one thing that I want to read from the introduction of your book, because this is what I read today because I thought it was so absolutely phenomenal. This is in your introduction. Sexual chaos is a precondition for totalitarian government. People who cannot regulate their thoughts, emotions, and sexual behavior or provide for their own needs vote for government to replace these core functions of family. Feminism and now queer theory erase the natural and healthy interdependence between the sexes and substitute total war. Not just vicious competition between men and women based on sex, but also internal war between each person and his or her very biology. Destroying the family and ending its direction of sexual energies into creation and productivity erases people's capacity for self-government. See, I don't know that people really stop to think about what you wrote. I think there's a lot of this, and I'm curious because you didn't really mention this in the book, but I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this. So many churches, so many religions are tolerant of this movement, of the LGBTQ movement. And you make the case, I would say quantitatively as well, just through all the citations, but you absolutely make the logical case that what's happening right now is meant to destroy the family and as a subset, destroy Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And how, if that's the case, are these churches knowing, well, and I guess they don't know what the end game is. Why are they giving them quarter? How is this happening?
Well, I think part of the answer is that some of those churches are false churches, right? They're led by shepherds who are wolves in sheep's clothing. Some of them, that's not all of them, but that's certainly some of them. some, obviously a lot of people really do not understand the antecedents. They don't understand what's behind. They believe the propaganda. And quite frankly, most people haven't been educated or well enough to understand things like this, right? Our education system has really done a number. You know this very well, Jenni.
Yeah.
On not just the current generation, but right, it's been a compounding degradation over more, than the last century. So the parents of, the children today, every generation currently in school is getting the worst, but even their parents got kind of, a backed up, slightly better version of really not very good education going back multiple generations now. So the ability of people to evaluate arguments, just their historical knowledge available to understand human nature, to understand, have seen, in other societies, how sexual license, if you just look into history, if you know anything about history, right? The fall of Rome absolutely included, for, commentators were talking about, childless women treating their dogs as children, right?
Yes. No, for sure.
Non-marital sexual behavior. That's always been tied to decadence and their fall of a culture, right? So, but if you've never learned any facts, if history is instead social studies, AKA socialism, communism studies, you don't have any information by which to make a good judgment about things. So people just believe whatever they're told on the screen, right? And so that forms a lot of the people of the congregations, including the pastors themselves. So, and as you know, it's harder for factual information to get out to people.
Oh, yes.
The internet is choked, the education system is controlled, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, the ability of people even to encounter information and that's part of the reason that I wrote a book, is so people can have, the work that someone else has done, lay it out in a easy to understand format, put all the research together so they don't have to do it themselves, something that you can use as a resource to understand yourself and talk to your friends and bring it to your pastor. So I think there's a combination of actual support. And if people who are really curious more about this ought to look also at the new book put out by Megan Basham. She's a Daily Wire reporter. It's called Shepherds for Sale. She talks about how, today a very large portion of the largest church institutions. So she's a Southern Baptist. She writes a lot about Southern Baptists. Therefore, she has a lot of good contacts there. But we know this is going on in the Catholic Church, in the Episcopalian Church, Methodist Church, etc. Right? She talks about how leftists like George Soros have made it a mission to erase the understanding of the people of the Bible, what the Bible says about men, male and female. They're pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into propaganda, getting kids. They are starting programs at Christian universities. There's large pastors, who are secretly behind the scenes telling other pastors how to, walk their congregations into supporting homosexuality, which is, as anyone who knows the Bible knows, that's completely against scripture directly. So, so there's a lot of influence operations that are backed by big money that are also working to take out the church, because they rightly see Christians as the major bulwark against the remaining of our society being conquered by sexual chaos.
Well, you said, and I need to read this paragraph too, because I want to make sure people hear this. The pride flag stands for the cultural Marxism seeking to destroy America. According to its own philosophers, pride isn't about private bedroom behavior. It's about regime change, like you talked about earlier. As the homosexual pedophile Michael Foucault put it, this mutation of Marxism seeks to, quote, subvert the hierarchy, unquote, or destroy all natural authorities, including the authority of truth, of reality itself. This is a call to permanent revolution against human norms, and the pride flag marks the territory these revolutionaries believe they hold. I don't think that people see that. I think that what you wrote right there is 100% accurate, but I don't think people see it.
I think more people are beginning to see it, right? Because it's really, really hard, even for not people who aren't all up on the academic theories of the last 150 years, which I don't think most, people need to be even, but they understand that pornography is in children's libraries.
Yes.
You know, they understand that that's creepy, wrong, and there shouldn't be that, you know, talking about, I'm not even going to give the list, right? But, you know, people can fill in the blanks. You know, if you want to see the list, you know, go to the American Library Association's list, you know, of pro-queer books, and just check a few of those out from the library. You know, anyone who, and I find it really, really interesting that we're in an era in which this is so open and obvious to understand. You know, the people like the American Library Association will openly state that it is pro-queer to and push pornography on children. That's weird. You know, you would think that that would be actually considered a bigoted statement to say queers want pornography for kids, right? But it's the queer, you know, activists themselves who are saying that right out there in the open. I mean, I think we should just take them at face value and say, okay, you believe it's pro-queer and necessary to, you know, push the queer movement to hand porn to kids. Well, I'm sorry, but that's pervy and criminal. And we don't want that in our town and to be done with our tax dollars. It's easier to see that now than it was 50 years ago, even 10 years ago.
It is, but Michael, you know, ran for school board in one of the largest suburbs of Oklahoma County and got extreme pushback for running. And part of it was because of, you know, his stand on, I mean, Michael, right?
Yeah, on the book issue, I mean, I was completely attacked on that. And all I said is, as parents, we deserve the right to actually just be informed as to the content of the books and let us make the decision whether our child can participate in that. But that's how it is. And Joy, I even went, like, when I was knocking doors, I had like a mom, you know, read all the books, did just a synopsis real quick, some, you know, one couple paragraph summary of the language and content. And I'd actually hand it to people and they said, you're lying. This isn't in our schools. You know, they didn't want to come to that realization that it's really that bad.
I think it's partly because people realize what they would have to do if what you're saying is true, right? People's entire lives are built around having bought the mortgage to put their kid in a certain school district. So, you know, you're asking them, you know, to completely change something that they have spent 15, 20, you know, years working to get the, you know, selecting the home, staying there, et cetera, et cetera. So when you think we're just talking about, I mean, it's also, you know, like they also, you know, many people, you know, support the Democrat Party, not because it supports pornography for children, right? And so confronted with, you know, the fact that this party they support and they believed all their life, you're basically asking them to repent, to understand that they have contributed to showing pornography to children. And we don't have a society that has basic Christian morality anymore. People are not used to repenting. They're not used to changing their mind. And they feel like they have to, it's admitting that they're a bad person and that they need to be written off. There's no understanding of forgiveness, and you actually are growing, you know, every single day. All of those Christian norms are completely gone. Even, you know, like you're pointing out, even in suburban Oklahoma, where people there are more church than they are in the rest of the country. So yeah, that's part of the reason why I talk about in the book that it is very, very hard to see how this could be turned around, because the level of, you know, the corruption of our character and our families is so deep, and the entire system is really tied up with it.
Well, let me ask you this, like, through all your research, I mean, do you see the attack and the mockery towards any other religion with the intensity like it is specifically just against Christians? I mean, like, when you look at all these other religions, they have legal entities that literally defend them. You know, if you say something or do something, you know, it's, you know, as just a white Christian, straight white Christian male, there's, other than my own faith, and, you know, that's like my only protection.
Well, there is, I mean, the Alliance Defending Freedom, the Beckett Fund, there are a number of very, very good religious liberty, you know, defense organizations, and they have a lot of affiliated lawyers throughout all the country, you know, the country. But you're right that it's absolutely clear. So we just saw this, for example, with the Olympics opening, right? The religion that is always public enemy number one for the queer supporters, that is Christianity. It isn't Islam. You know, I mean, we are all aware that Islam has historically, you know, decapitated and thrown homosexuals off the top of buildings, right? You know, Christians do have a history of some of that stuff in some, you know, medieval Christian countries, and it's also in, the early Jewish state, right? But the enforcement of that among Christians was way, way, way lower than it has been among Muslim Sharia law states. There's way more violence against homosexuals coming from Muslims versus Christians. Yet the LGBT people go after Christians and they almost completely ignore Muslims, right? And I think the reason for that, and I write about this in the last 2 chapters of the book, is that we're not merely talking about a cultural war. It is actually at bottom of this cultural war is a spiritual war. So, I have an entire chapter that talks about how amazingly Christian but demonic many of the pro LGBT, people will say. They will literally say, I believe in God and Satan. I'm on the side of Satan. I quote, Susan Stryker, a transgender theorist, basically saying, I'm a transgender person as a Luciferian act of rebellion against Jesus Christ. And I'm reading that as a Christian going, holy smokes, he's more bold about religion than I am. So I think, when the pro-Satanists are the people more direct and reinforcing the Christian frame than many Christians are, maybe that's one of the reasons I've gotten more bold and direct about talking about my own faith and doing all the media for this book, because I just don't, it's not going to happen that, the Satan supporters are going to be more Christian than I am. So here I am, even though, I have a history of, mostly talking in more neutral, secular, public square kinds of terms, because that's my history, as an education reporter. But I'm just thinking, if the Satanic Temple, which is, a so-called religious organization largely comprised of queer people that in their rights, they blaspheme Christianity, if they're going to, use their status in order to fight my religion, well, game on, buddy. I just don't think it is it is really embarrassing that people who hold up Satan as their God would be more direct and fierce and active than Christians who have the real God behind us ought to be.
And if I can make a comment towards everything you just said there and how important it is, I think even at the very lowest levels of our education, because when you look at, to me, why we're fighting so hard is because ultimately where the mind of our kid is kind of where their heart is going to go. Yeah. So if you have the introduction of all these sexual things, all this deviousness, just self-absorption, total decadence, when you introduce that through the school system and it becomes normalized, it's so much easier for those kids to just become, part of that. So it's so important, I think, that we, don't forget that. There's just such an attack on these kids in school.
Absolutely.
Ultimately, that's where they're starting this deal.
Well, here's an interesting story. I met a lady yesterday, very, very sweet lady, and she has 2 young children, and she teaches English as a second language in a school in Oklahoma County. And she put her 2 young children in a public elementary school. And she didn't think about it really because she's a public school teacher. And she said that one day her son came home, and this was early on in the year, and was saying things like, asking questions like, Mom, is it okay for a boy to wear pink ribbons in their hair?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and she's like, well, how do you really answer that question? Well, it's not something that we would do in our family. That's not, Then he comes home and asks, is it okay for boys to kiss other boys on the lips? Now, I want you to think, this is 2nd grade.
Yeah, he's 7.
Oh goodness. I honestly, I was shocked by that. And of course, she took her kids out of public school and put them into a Catholic elementary. But the point of the matter is, I think people don't understand. I can't say that in enough times. And I think that when I read your book, I thought, if we could get your book into the hands of every church going member of people who believe in Jesus Christ, I think this could stop, because I think people go, ooh, icky. I don't want to think about that. I don't want to talk about that. Right. Or then they'll say, do what?
I get it. You know, I felt the same way too, but I thought this is too important. I can't not.
But it absolutely is. And then the other problem we have is we live in Oklahoma, and we have long been thought of as the Bible Belt. We have long been thought of as a red state, and you can't move people off that pivot.
Yeah.
They won't go. So they say, well, that doesn't happen in the Bible Belt. Well, yes, I'm here to tell you that it does. Absolutely. In elementary school. So I think the other thing about your book that's so absolutely phenomenal is not only do you go through every single chapter with all these citations of, if you don't believe me, look it up. Your whole thesis is, if we can't stop the destruction of the family, and if we can't stand up as Christians, then we're toast.
And I mean, frankly, I want to live in a country where it's free for me and possible for me to raise my children in my faith. And we all know that the cultural revolutionaries, they don't want that to be possible, right? You know, they are already, like, you know, putting blasphemous material all across our TV screens and attempting to catechize our children away from their parents' religion. They see parents as an obstacle, as, you know, something to be discarded, set aside. You know, old folly daddies, really, they believe that they own the children, right? So these people are not going to let us alone. Which means that the only thing that you have left to do is you have to say, yeah, no, it's not happening, not in my town. And you have to take whatever steps that you need to do in order to first make sure that your own children are raised appropriately, where they're not going to encounter people telling them at 7, you know, that boys are kissing boys and showing them images of that, and things that really mess with the child's psychological development. I mean, we published a story, you know, of someone whose kids, you know, in public school, I believe he was age 9, 3rd, 4th grade, you know, had a teacher, transgender teacher substitute teacher come in, you know, one day, and the kids were all day, you know, going to be with that teacher for the indefinite future during the other teacher's time off. Like that, for me, that is a hard my children are not going to be exposed to that. And that's why they're not going to ever be in a public school. Just because, I mean, and the other thing there is, I mean, it's not just the public school, it's also the cell phones, right? So I get that people, you know, and you know, even if you homeschool your kids, if you let them have cell phones, you're giving them portals into hell,
Yes,
right?
you are.
Pornography is easily accessible. And now pornography isn't just you go to like a, you know, XXX site or whatever. It's in the ads on Snapchat. It's in the ads on Facebook. You know, every single app that your kid might be using, there's pornography on it. They call them ads, but it's pornography, right? And so, and you know, and so parents also, you know, I get that people resist actually coming to terms with reality. You know, we put up the psychological defense mechanism of denial, because if we accept what is going on, then we do have to do some soul searching and maybe some major changes to our lives. Yeah. No, it's hard. You know, who wants to make the move, see how you can get mom, you know, pulled home from work, make the, you know, maybe, you know, cut off that, you know, vacation to Disneyland or whatever and go camping instead, so you can save the money to put your kids in private school or homeschool or whatever. Like, we're talking major life reorienting things that people have to do. You know, your kid be the odd one out, not having a cell phone around his friends, you know, all of that stuff. That is a lot of friction that people aren't willing to accept. But I mean, I think that's really, you either choose that or your kid, you know, is seeing pornography at age 7. And I just don't think it's a responsible, you're doing your duty as a parent. I don't think you're doing your duty as a parent if it's possible for your 7-year-old to be talking about men kissing.
Well, I want to add a little caveat to something you said there. This is, when I ran for school board, a mom told me this was told to her specifically, and Jenni knows this. This was told to her specifically by one of the head administrators in Edmond Public School District. So not just like at a campus or site, this is one of the head administrators in the entire district. Literally told this mom face to face, because the mom was like, hey, I don't like this for my kids, or, you know, she was opposing some policy or, you know, the books or something. And this administrator literally told this mom that the second we started transporting these kids and feeding them, they became our kids. And Wow. That's literally their mentality in the school district. That's literally what that administrator told this mom straight to her face.
I think there is some legitimacy to that. Like, I don't actually think that the school owns the kids, but, you know, if the school is, you know, and the state is providing food, housing, transportation, daycare. Because I mean, a lot of school really isn't schooling; it's daycare. So it's just child warehousing. Whatever. Like you said, after school activities, and the parents see their kids for maybe 2 hours, in the evenings, and then they, put them to bed. And they don't need, during those 2 hours, the kids are looking at their devices. I mean, in what sense do you really have a family if that's your family life? It's
Yeah.
But I think
allowing strangers to be more of an influence on your kids than you are. Are you really a parent?
Yeah. Well, to me, that's part of that entire Marxist kind of family breakup system.
Totally.
Is, now the school is the father or the mother.
Yeah.
And then ultimately that's going to just escalate up into the state or the government or, whoever, is always going to be the ruling entity of whatever that child is.
Right. And I mean, and back to my book, right? The kind of kids who have big daddy government, big mommy government provide every single thing from them for all of their waking hours from infancy through adulthood. Those people aren't going to be self-governing people who want a small government and want to run their own lives. They've never run their own lives from infancy. They've never run their own lives. Their parents haven't run their own lives, right? So we're creating the kind of people who are not compatible with a republic. And so that's part of the reason that I do think people like you, Michael, they need to run for school board. They need to run for state school board, need to run for state legislature to get some control over this system, because, because those people someday will vote. What happens to those kids in those warehouses is going to affect our rights and our ability to educate our children and be able to live in peace in our, and have our constitutional rights applied to us. And so I do think, even if your kids aren't in a public school, that all people really need to care about what's going on with all of those things, because the sort of people that they're turning out are people incompatible with us having our natural rights to self-government, to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and our property.
So I'm back to your book. You have chapter 8. It's short in terms of chapters. You only have 8 chapters. But chapter 8 was strategies for counter-revolutionaries, which is us. I mean, if we don't agree, then we need to figure out ways to stop this. And you gave a very large, I was surprised at how long the chapter was on what you can do to help stop this. And some of the things were yes, like, what I did was become mayor of my town, what, Michael did, which was run for school board. People don't understand. They really, honestly, I believe that they don't. Well, how many times have you talked to people and they'll talk about the presidential election? And then you say, oh, well, do you know when your school board election is? And they have no idea, because that's not what's important to them.
Yeah.
They think that the presidential election is going to solve all the problems, and they don't understand that bottom up is going to be a better plan for solving those than top down. Totally. So I loved the way that you were very careful about explaining that, look, start at the bottom. Congress, you even said in the book, which I loved, you were like, well, if Congress hasn't had the guts to stand up and do any of this now, do you really think they're going to, later on? Well, they're not. So, you take that stand.
You're a lost cause. I report on them every single day, right? And I think it's worth being in the game there, but to expect, the great savior from the federal government, from Trump, from Congress. I mean, you haven't been paying any attention in the past 50 years.
No, but so many people haven't.
Yeah.
I mean, I literally believe once I started going back, Michael put me on the road of reading a book called The Killing of Uncle Sam. And it ruined my life. I blame Michael for ruining my life, because it literally went back to before the Civil War, before the founding of the country, and talked about how we got off track. I mean, immediately we started the country, but then got off track immediately. So
that's human nature.
Yes. And I see that perspective and I get it. But how do you make people understand that too big to fail is a rotten idea?
Well, I mean, I think people need to understand, and I think a lot of the lockdowns really made this apparent.
do.
You know,
I
if
agree.
going through Common Core didn't, like, the federal government can't come to save you, and it's not going to, and that your local government really has a lot more not relation to your everyday life, but also capacity. I mean, look, as you mentioned at the beginning, of the live stream today, the government is broke. It's just a matter of years before that actually starts affecting, whether the checks start bouncing, right? Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, our defense budget, it's being paid for with deficit spending. And at some point, there's going to be some economic reckoning with that. I don't know if it'll be this year, 10 years, 30 years, I don't know, but it's going to happen. And I think, in the meantime, people who, I mean, just mathematically speaking, historically speaking, that can't continue the way that it is, right? And so so therefore, if we want to have functioning things going on, we need really to have this archipelago of locally well-managed cities, that look at that and say, the federal government really is not going to be rescuing anything. They can't even solve, like, they haven't passed a regular budget in 12 years. The only thing they can get together to do is reward their campaign donors with more crony, corruption. That's all they've been able to do for a long time. Right. Given that prior, how can I, prepare at the local level to keep the lights on, to keep the water clean, to keep the road patches filled, in the event and whenever it happens that the federal government, the fact that it's bankrupt is really going to become apparent to people. So we need people, and I don't think it is a problem to run for something or to be kicked out of office. Like you're pointing out, at the local level, you can win an election by just swaying 50, 100, couple hundred votes. And you can do that by knocking on doors. I know multiple people who have done that. And so you have a lot, and then, as you know, once people get into those lower, those closer to the people positions, that can be a stepping stone for them to move up to, so you need basically to create a farm team, of local people controlling things. And it also helps if you have, a couple dozen people who are there knocking doors for you, who help you with your campaign, who have things like, I know, helps to have a good local Facebook page that gets out the counter narrative if your local or state media sucks, right? People need to have good information that's defending, someone who is always going to be under attack. You're always going to be on the offensive if you're a liberty kind of person. And so you need, with a dozen people around you, you can really make a good place of it, and then you need to have, not just be the lone person on the school board or the city council. You need to have, a voting majority. Work on that. That'll take you your next 5 years. All of those things are things that actually a good committed group of people could do if they stuck to it for 5 to 10 years. And I think just more people need to realize that, because we are going to need lifeboats whenever the federal government really does go belly up. I don't know about you, but I still want to have clean water coming to my home. I want the sewer system to keep working. And, the federal government doesn't have a large part of that now, but, the people who are in office now, they can't function without thinking of the federal government as their savior. You need to have some more entrepreneurial, can-do people in those positions to, make sure, that things can keep trucking along once we do hit the bankruptcy stage. And when I say bankruptcy, I think the finances are just a metaphor for our entire culture, right? Like, our families are bankrupt too, our relationships are bankrupt. So I think the great thing about being in such a decaying and decadent situation is that anything you do is helpful. Being a great mom to your kids, reducing your screen time as a family, going on some walks, maybe getting your heart and your legs a little healthier, and then having some more conversation time. For me personally, a challenge that I have is, like, I don't like chaos, and I have 6 kids, so one thing that I work on is running into the chaos when it happens and taking the reins of my family, right? Rather than being like, oh my gosh, and just shutting the door and waiting for the screaming to die down. Yeah, but so we all have things that we can work on that develop our leadership capacities. That's a leadership capacity that I'm working on right there, leading my own kids. And I mean, I think being able to hold your head in the chaotic situation, whatever it is for you, and learning, skills, even though it's awkward, a conversation, loving people, hosting people in your home, building relationships, encouraging people to get out of debt, all of those stuff, anywhere you can introduce health and flourishing, that is something that's going to make a difference in our society long term. And we all need to be doing whatever it is that we can, wherever we are.
Well, you said again, one thing, I forgot something that I was going to mention while you were talking. The thing that I loved about what you said at the end and in all the different ideas that you were giving for people to manage some of this and help, ameliorate it. One of the interesting things I thought you said was, yes, you need to start where you are, but you can't stick your head in the sand. You can't just go, well, I'm going to be a prepper and I'm just going to sit here on my little spot and I'm going to do my own thing and I'm going to not, have anything to do with anybody else. And I thought that was a really wonderful thing to point out, because I know there are some people who do have that tendency to say, I'm out, it's over my head, I'm out, I'll just do what I can.
I'm just taking care of my own family, screw everybody else.
That's exactly right.
That you need to start with your own family. But, again, I actually grew up on a working hobby farm. So I know that, even the Amish cannot provide 80% of their things that they need to live without having a community of 200 people that show up for a barn raising. One guy does the meat, another guy does the corn, another guy does the beans. Like just one family all by themselves out in the sticks, or the individual prepper. That's not a way, you're just not going to survive that way. Individuals get picked off all by themselves, whether we're talking, a Mad Max scenario, or whether we're just talking, just everyday life. Your kids need friends. You need friends. You need someone to marry, and you can't provide everything that you need to live all on your own. It's just not sustainable. People need to have they need to have communities that are all around them and working on the same project together. And again, that requires leadership skills. If you see this and other people don't, you have a role to play in helping them it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take 5, 10, 15 years working on people, nudging on them, using the means of persuasion, encouraging them, just developing how to lead, encourage, grow other people, and then not getting discouraged, when you lose a race, when the person you pick to try to encourage really turns out not to be interested in all. Instead of despairing, which is a sin and doesn't do anything productive, you say, okay, well, I planted that seed. It didn't come up. I'm going to plant 10 more. And that actually is a principle that works in gardening. And it also needs to be one that you apply to everyday life. I have a lot of critters in my garden. They like to eat things. And if I just say, oh, well, I guess the chipmunks get everything this year, or the bunnies. Instead, if I say, okay, put out the trap and plant 20 more seeds, then I get some harvest, right? So you have to have the same mentality and not be so easily overcome and discouraged that every single idea that you have doesn't always work out. Just move on to the next one. Try something else until it sticks. It will stick.
Well, but I think one of the worst traits that any of us have anymore, but I think sometimes conservatives are worse at it. Mm-hmm. We feel like if it doesn't happen within the McDonald's minute, then we're done. We've spent a whole 6 months working to get that candidate in, and that just didn't work out. And so now we're done. And, or I can't work with that person because they don't have the same mentality about this that I do.
Yeah.
And we spend this time in these spats at one another, and we're never pointing the weaponry downfield.
Yeah.
We always seem to kind of circle the wagons and point it at each other. Yeah. And I don't know how to fix that problem, because it especially among conservatives. I've been in this gig over 15 years, and I've always said leading conservatives is like herding cats, because so I don't know how you get people to, and I've preached it, Michael's preached it. It's not this cycle, guys. keep going down the
Well,
road. We didn't just quit after Common Core,
You learn a lot of stuff from a loss, right? You learn what houses might be susceptible if I work on them. You learn, you get your lists filled out. You learn, oh, this person actually is influential at this church or this group of people, and I get 20 votes, from talking to her. You get a lay of the land. You learn who your enemies are and how they function. So you learn a lot of things. I mean, if Abraham Lincoln gave up after a loss, he never would have been president. He lost I think it was 14 times for every win. And I also, if you just think about in terms of sports, right? People in sports, their team can lose, and they never say, well, I guess our school isn't having a middle school basketball team. No, they would never say that,
So that's a great one. That's a great one. I love that one. I mean, that's absolutely true. So I guess the thing to do is, well, I'm going to continue to pump your book because it really was honestly some of the best reading I've done in a while. And I will say this too, if I can read it, the whole book, basically from 1 a.m. this morning, it's not a hard read. But you sure do learn a lot in the process. And the whole idea behind having that whole 8th chapter of, if you're stumped and you don't know what to do, go to the 8th chapter, look it up, see what she has there, because there were so many good things that you might have just not even, you might not have even thought about. And I will say one thing that is, we had a very good year in our primary elections here in Oklahoma.
Great.
And part of the reason why is because we've had they're not Republican. It's not a GOP thing. They're just little moms and pops who are in small towns popping up, who are going for candidates to help candidates. They're knocking doors. They're putting together envelopes. There's a lady here who has in Edmond who started an organization called the Lion's Den. And Rhonda has done a phenomenal job with what she's done there by she has people come in. Candidates will bring the people who come to the Lion's Den, to those gatherings, bring things that they need to have filled out, or, that they can do envelopes or stamps or whatever. And she has helped so many candidates and that's not a hard thing to do. She just said, you know what, you all come over to my house. We'll figure out how to do this. And then it blew up. And so she has to do it in a church to accommodate all the people, who want to be able to help. So it is doable. It is doable.
And it's worth doing.
And it's worth doing.
I mean, because I think about this not only locally, but also, nationally, right? It is hard to face down the barrel of things looking so bad. And if you're but I also think that I'm not in control of the time in which I live, or actually the ultimate outcome. But what I am responsible for is the choice that I choose, how I choose to spend each minute, my hour, that make up my life. And, when I meet my maker, do I want to say to him, yeah, I really did a lot of Netflix, or do I want to say, well, I did the best that I could, and the success was left up to you, right? Obviously, you want to be the good and faithful servant who's like, well, I showed up to lick, to put stamps on envelopes. I didn't know what to do, so I knocked on doors carrying, pamphlets. I did whatever I could think of with the energy that I had and the time that I had around my family responsibilities. And I really think that, that's the life well lived, regardless of the outcome, which we can't control anyway.
That is so very well said, because I do think even for me, I get to the point where I think, gosh, I've been doing this so long. I'm just sick and tired of it. And, it does become a drain. And I've seen so many people come and go and come and go, and they don't stick with it. And I think, gosh, if we had so-and-so, back. And so I was absolutely, I'm going to put your book up again one more time because I really want to make sure. Oh, there it is. All right. Sometimes this is not the easiest thing to do. Don't want to stop sharing. I actually do want to share it. So let's share, shall we? But while I'm trying to get it to share, I do want to mention yet again for everybody who's watching, this was probably one of the best books that I've read in quite some time, and you can get it on Amazon. It is not long. It is an easy read, but if you want to have a book that is going to explain to people why the homosexual agenda is not okay and where it comes from and all of that, this is the thing. This is the book. This is where you need to go to get that information. And honestly, when does it come out in soft cover?
I actually don't know. I'd have to ask my publisher. We're still in it's just like 6 weeks since it came out, so it's a little early.
Yeah, because honestly, I would hope that it would be so affordable that people could buy a box of them and hand them out, because it's
I think if like a church or something wanted, was interested in that, our publisher can give discounts for groups, and they do that for book groups all the time. So you could just refer people to me, and I can connect them.
Well, I hope, because we have a nice audience this morning.
Yeah, so just reach out to Jenni on her email that's on the screen if you're interested in that, and she can help you figure it out.
Let me put it up here bigger so people can make sure they see it. Was so excited to have you on. And I just was blown away by this book. I mean, you've always been a great writer, but this was really, honestly, I think like I said, again, the best thing that I've seen written in some time. And I think it's going to be, as far as I'm concerned anyway, a quintessential book to explain why what we're seeing happening with the whole LGBTQ movement happening. It explains why, it explains how to stop it. And thank you so much for coming on and talking about it today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It is a pleasure. And it's very kind of you to ask.
Oh, well, no, honestly, this is an important book. So it's not just kind, it's because this was phenomenal. And I want to stress that over and over again so people will get the book, and you can get it on Amazon. So please do that. Joy, you are a force to be reckoned with. I'm telling you, I just can't even believe you wrote this book, raising 6 kids. I mean, writing curricula. I mean, and I do want you to mention before we get off of here really quickly, even though I know this is kind of off topic, the one thing that I did want you to talk about just briefly is your book about children's classics. And I didn't pull that up, but I do.
Sure.
Is there a place I can
find that? There's a link to that from my bio. So if you search Joy Pullmann, my name's on the screen there, and maybe the Federalist, you'll find my bio and there's a link to it. But I just have a list of classic books for children because I was really frustrated when I went to the library looking for things to read to my littles, and I would find I would call garbagey books, right? Like the art was like crappy, like my kids could have made it themselves. The stories weren't really good. And so I think I've got something like 130, books on there for people who just, want to skip the fluff, go to the library, get their armload of books, and bring it home and really enjoy something that they're reading with kids. That's why I just put it together. And I know I have friends of mine that use it for a preschool, like play group that they do. It's kind of like a loose preschool, but it's with mothers, getting together once a week to do some activities with their kids, and they like to use the books off the list for that as well.
So, one more thing, why are classic books so important? Can you give me just a brief synopsis of what, because I try to explain it to people,
Yeah.
but you wrote a book on it. So explain it to people.
Well, they're first of all important. Little children, the entire architecture of their brain is developed by how much people are speaking to them, the quality of the language that they hear. So a classic book for children is expanding their vocabulary. It's expanding their exposure to new, things about the world. So, right, if you read about a circus, that's a new kind of experience and environment, and the children learns the words about the circus, or about baking with mother, or a little bear, going on an expedition, right? Winnie the Pooh does that. So all of those books, they not only they first of all are very, very important to read to your child and to talk a lot with your child, because that really sets the foundation for the entire rest of their life, their intellectual capacity, and your ability to communicate is absolutely not only tied to just brainy stuff, because I don't really think that IQ is the number one thing we should care about, although a lot of people do. I think it's also tied to your ability to love, because we understand deeper the more that we have words to put to things. If you have a word to put for a certain feeling or for a certain experience, you have a greater and enlarged understanding. And with that understanding, you can love people better. You can communicate with them better. You can know where they're coming from. And it just makes you a better person that's part of a family, community, or a neighborhood. All of those language skills are extremely important for developing that, not only their academic, but also their emotional the abilities that everybody needs to be a good husband, wife, child, friend. That's good for everyone. But the other thing that's really important for young people is that we're losing is a common culture shared between people. If two people grew up and they had no similar cultural experiences, right? So if one kid grew up watching YouTube stars and another child grew up, listening, reading, Winnie the Pooh, reading, the
Beatrix Potter.
Yes, Beatrix Potter, all of the beautiful things. I've seen this actually in playgroups, right? When the kids get together, the YouTube kid and the book reading kid can hardly talk to each other because they have nothing shared to understand each other, where each other is coming from, right? And so giving your children classic literature introduces them to their common heritage. It's basically saying, welcome to your people. Here's the best that they have thought about, and we're giving it to you as an inheritance. You are a part of this. It's something greater than you. And it's teaching them what they should love and what they should direct their attention to, lengthening their attention span. And again, the more of an attention span you have, the better you can love people, because when you pay attention to others, you're focusing on other people, you are really loving them. So all of those things are, there's many more things that children get from classic literature. But one of the things that's found, for example, it's better than YouTube, just partly because the richness of the language and the exposure to different kinds of scenarios and experiences. And there's a lot of history, cultural heritage that's brought in with the classic books that you really aren't going to get, from internet videos, even if they claim that they're doing that. And then, of course, the emotional bonding that children get from sitting next to mother, having her devote. I just spend 15 minutes a day with my little people. It's a very small amount of time, but over time that really builds up, right, where they say, Mama loves me, she focuses on me, she speaks to me, and they have that bond that is all together with you. And that is extremely important for their emotional security, which, and again, if they have emotional security, they're more likely to be self-controlled, able to direct their activities and choose between actions they'd like to take, rather than just acting impulsively. So this is just really building an entire foundation for your child with something as simple as you can read 3 picture books in 15 minutes, and 15 minutes a day, I just try to do it 15 minutes 3 times a week. And that really is developing a foundation for the entire rest of your child's life in love, in learning and being exposed and bestowed their cultural heritage, and all the best things that, people throughout, people connected to our civilization have developed and loved on little children and love them so much to want to give them. That's something you personally can give to your own children through reading with them.
Well, I think I'm going to insert something here too. My youngest son was just proved to be the hardest child in the world to teach. He just was parent resistant, it was like,
I had one of those.
Yeah. He just would, I would say something and he would automatically say, nope.
Yep.
It was just, that was the way it was. But we started him reading classic literature. I started all of them on classic literature. Narnia, for example, Wind in the Willows, Charlotte's Web, all these things, they read from being small. And I kept kind of pushing the classics on the young one. And I'm absolutely surprised today what an absolutely phenomenal writer that kid is. I mean, he's probably not the greatest at math, but my goodness, if you ask him to write a paragraph on something, the punctuation will be correct. The verb tenses will be correct. He knows how to develop an opening sentence and a closing thought. He's just done a lot of that just simply from reading good books and being read to good books. So, it's not even just the sexual pornography in the books today. It is the absolute inanity. They're inane. They're completely inane.
Is a good word.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know how to explain it any better than that.
It's kind of, for me, it's what an economist calls opportunity cost, right? Either your child could read just some time wasting book, or your child could read something that is speaking to them on all of the levels of the human being. It's speaking to their soul. It's filling their minds with beautiful images, teaching them what to love and what to hate evil, to love the good, teaching them to watch, interactions between the characters. You're learning, emotional intuition, all of those things you get that, is built into a great book that is if you could either have your child, learning and developing as a human on multiple levels, or just, kind of flipping through a throwaway book that doesn't have much to offer them with the same amount of time. So I always, want to pick the better thing for my child because it's a contribution to their entire life.
Well, you said it. I mean, that's absolutely. I mean, I 100% agree. And I just love what you said. I'm actually going to clip that section.
Great.
Joy Pullmann talks about classic literature because I don't think people get it, as you pointed out. And
some people don't get it, but a lot of people do. That's my number one most popular book that I've ever sold. People love it. Is
it?
Yeah.
Oh, that makes me so happy.
Yeah. I think, many people, many thousands of people have bought that book.
I'm very ecstatic. Well, that does make me happy then. So maybe people are getting it, but I just look at what the literature is that's out there in the public today. And what I was reporting on 15, 17 years ago, it's gone. It started going into the toilet a long time ago, and when your kid is reading something, and let's say they're 15 and it's a Lexile score of 7.
Yep.
How are you improving on a 15-year-old?
And then he says, I hate reading. And you're like, well, it's because you're reading these stupid books. There's nothing interesting there. It's,
Yeah. So, well, Joy, I know we're over time for today, but I have so enjoyed talking with you. And again, let me see if I can put up the book one more time so that we can see this again. Yes. So please don't forget, go out and look on Amazon and catch Joy's book and even the classic book that we just talked about before. Joy, thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm sorry, Michael had to slip off, but unfortunately, he has a job. So.
Oh, okay. Great.
Yes.
Well,
so
having me.
He was called away. It's always good to see you. Thank you again so much for being with us today. And I hope I get to talk to you soon. And thank you so much. We had a nice audience today. Thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you so much for being with us. And please share this and please share the book. And we'll see you again next Wednesday. So thanks so much for tuning in. Bye.